What is up, my man?
Zamboni, we find ourselves again in this virtual paradise.
Again,
of
here
wonders.
we are.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, when I think about the internet, the word paradise almost always comes to mind.
Trips from the tongue. What utopia have we created? How could it even be better? You know,
I know,
I
right?
can't even imagine.
I wonder if we might be able to shine a little more blue light into our eyes.
Oh shit! You reminded me. Hold on. I gotta swap up.
Okay.
Yeah,
you know what? It's teamwork over here. Yeah,
There we go.
the first time you came on the show, you were wearing those. And it took me a long time to clock what they were because they're so reflective. And I was like, what
Yes.
is going on?
They're
right
massively reflective, though. Like, it is like you are here. You are
now?
visible.
Right. Totally. It feels like I'm in the Matrix or something like that. But it's like an Elton John Matrix.
That's the only Matrix I'm trying to go to.
I'm saying.
John Matrix.
You know?
That's a very different movie. It's a good one still. Keanu Reeves is still in it. Lawrence Fishburne's still in it. Trinity weirdly missing. I don't know where she went. You know what I mean? It's strange all of a sudden.
Sure. I don't know. How different is it? From what I hear.
It's not. Matrix is super gay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I hear. That it's like as gay as possible. Now I haven't gone back to watch the film since I've heard that analysis, because I was just like, I thought it was an action movie. There was kung fu and shit.
There's kung fu and shit.
Guns. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm 12 or whatever, you know. Yeah, let's do more of this.
Yeah.
And then I heard that I was actually gay for having a crush on Trinity. I was like, that's not what I thought was going on. Is this
there's some. I listen. All right, I am dodgy on my Wachowski sister, like, theory. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I'm going to lay a couple things out. One, Sense8 is the best. In my opinion, is their best work. Everybody should watch it.
A few times,
dude.
I haven't seen it though.
Tremendous. Jess got me into it. It's just, particularly if you're a magician and you have that chosen family element. You know what I mean? And you have these weird connections with people who maybe share a commonality with you that you didn't expect to find in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you feel that deep soul connection. This idea of, like, you know, other ways to think about it is like maybe people return in pods. You know what I mean? Like some souls are entangled together and they're always kind of coming back and working things out. So it's got that aspect, plus the queer aspect, plus everything else, plus the polyamorous aspect. But if you go back, I believe, and I'm just trying to remember what I heard about this. I believe that people are saying there's a whole trans identity thing that's being worked out in the Matrix, which would make sense for the sisters. Like, that's something they were going through. And that, you know, that these characters, particularly Trinity, I think the way people are talking, is more of a trans character, and that this is their way of working these issues out on the film. You know, what is reality? What is the rules of society that you can't get around? How does this all play together? I actually really
think
did.
Geo
You watch?
was supposed to be wrapped up in it too.
Yeah. Yep. Everybody. It's all sort of worked out in that same way. And people have all kinds of different reasons for pulling out, like, this detail means this detail means that, etc. Sure.
Have I watched 4 hours of YouTube videos on this subject? Perhaps.
Maybe
I've done a deep dive.
But I do think the general theory, though, of saying, like, whether that's all planned out or intentional, when an artist or a couple artists have serious concerns on their mind, it's going to come into the work. You know what I mean? Like, that's so. Sure. Yeah, it's there. You know. Did you see the last movie?
Yes, but
I like it.
Yeah, did you like it?
Yeah, I do like it. For lots of reasons. One of which is I think it reveals how Trinity is the hero all along. Do you know what I mean? Like, it sort of like resets that in the right framework, where without it, I think it's easy to miss that. You know what I mean? That and see Neo as the real hero of the piece. And so I like that aspect. I like that. And I also like that the idea is that, like, no, he's always working with and through her. And it makes that very clear in this one, you know, sort of like brings that together in a cool way. So I like it. I like the fight scenes in it too. I think it's good. You know, I think it holds up as a good flick. So
the kung fu choreography is the bomb. So
that's what I came for, you know.
Indeed, indeed. That is what I'm here for in the Matrix movies. Although in that last film, I don't know about the kung fu in that.
It's pretty. There's some good kung fu in there. There's some good stuff.
Where it is, everybody's a little too grown for that at this point.
I guess it is very silly. I love it though. I mean, the John Wick movies are equally silly. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're super silly, but the martial arts in them, fantastic.
Yeah, love it.
I actually put off watching John Wick for a long time because the way everybody kept describing it to me, they were like, "Oh, it's so brutal, so brutal," and like, I have to be in the right headspace to watch a brutal martial arts film, you know?
Right.
Then I watch it and I'm like, this isn't brutal. This is some like Aikido, Judo, Gun Fu, flip stuff. Like this is such a good fantasy of what, you know, it's not even that gross out, you know, it's just a lot of really good judo takedowns. And I'm like, whoa, great. Yeah, like this is fun. Don't kill that dude's dog. This all seems justified to me. I don't see why there's a problem with anything in this movie. So
I love it when they don't kill the dog. It's not the dog's fault. It's never the dog's fault. You ever met a mean ass dog? It's not the dog's fault.
Yeah, it's not the dog's fault. It's not the dog's fault.
This is what I come back to every time. I have been disrespected by a lot of dogs. Every time I look at that dog and I'm like, my man, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're being a real dick right now. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Listen, somebody did not teach you right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's this a comedian, he does like Instagram stuff, but I think his Instagram handle is Fredo on TV, something like that. It's him like
Fredo
commenting
on TV. Fredo, like the mafia brother that gets killed in the lake.
I think it's either that or like Fredo on TV. Anyway, it's something like that. It's one of those kind of things.
Uh-huh.
He's had one. He's got a lot of good commentary. But we had one. It was I don't know how you even get these internet videos sometimes of like there's this like toddler like standing in like one of those like toddler water park spray fountain kind of things, and he's just like gently putting his hand in the water, you know, and he's like experiencing it for the first time. You can see this like look of joy come over his face, and he's like touching his heart. He's like, you know, like, Mom, this is so beautiful. And this kid who's like 10, you know, and like kind of he looked like I did. He was kind of pudgy, you know what I mean? He came over and just like smash the toddler into the ground, you know what I mean? Just like waste him. And you know, the community guy's like, this is why I can't be a parent, because either the kid or the parent is I'm gonna have to fight somebody here, and like I can't fight
Sure.
a 10-year-old, so it's gonna have to be whatever random human didn't teach this kid to not slam toddlers onto the ground at the water park. And I feel like dogs is the same thing. You're like, yeah, you're biting my foot, but somebody else needs to pay what just happened here.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, well, I also do. Nope, I'm not dying on that hill.
Wait, were you about to defend the kid who's slamming toddlers?
I am agnostic. We will never know. The people will never know what type of bullshit I was about to be on.
That's a real contrarian response. You're like, hold up, maybe that bully is okay.
I do have a contrarian streak in me that's willing. I'm always willing to steel man the other position. Like, is it possible? There's a couple of reasons for that. One is I am the problem. Almost every time it's almost always true that I am the problem in the situation. So if I am fucked up about something, then if I look at the other guy's perspective, then there's a strong argument. There's at least a strong possibility that their side of the story is reasonable in some kind of fashion, you know? So, and this is actually one of the things that I like, you know, as I'm moving into like social commentary or whatever, like we'll see how much of that actually happens. But as I move into that kind of space, one of the things that even my heroes, even the people who I think are really good at it, fall into is straw manning. You know, sort of like saying like, this is the other side's point and fuck that shit, and like knock it down immediately. Whereas I think that it's reasonable to like look at what other people are doing and being like, okay, do they have a point? Is there a reason for this to show up? You know, and sometimes you end up going down a contrarian path.
I admire it. I think it's something that you do very well. I have a similar but differently motivated opinion about straw man, steel man positions, which is yours seems to come out of some sort of understanding that there's a human commonality, that we each could have something valuable to contribute. Mine is that if I don't overcome and rule the strongest position, then I am weak. I must destroy them at their most powerful, or else have I achieved anything? You know, it's like
I love this. This is really true, and this demonstrates weakness when people only put up the straw man. It's like, well, you haven't done anything, you know, like actually, no one's impressed by your argument when you just made the other side sound dumb.
Yeah, I'm not, you know, it's, I am teasing somewhat about my motivation, but not really, in the sense that, like, I do believe that. I do, there's cowardice in the straw man, you know what I mean? And it shows you to be the coward, right? And it was funny, I was just talking to, so I reference him sometimes. My father was a Baptist minister. He was of the Jimmy Carter, not Jerry Falwell variety. So he liked to build houses much more than he liked to yell at people about who they were sleeping with. That does not mean that the kind of Protestant Christianity he was working with, I don't agree with it. You know what I mean? But like, he was sincere in his path and is sincere in that path. And was much more interested in charity than anything else. So, but it meant that I was embroiled in constant fights growing up with like fundamentalists, the people who now run the Southern Baptist Convention, these people who are kind of just toxic madness, right? But he got really fired up recently because they just had their big convention. So he was fired up about it, about all the crazy stuff coming out. But he was talking about how political it's gotten in the sense of trying to shut down religious liberty for other people, which he finds personally offensive because, correctly, Baptists were people who fought for religious liberty. That was they're the reason we have the First Amendment, you know. And so to see them do like a 180 was really upsetting. And he's like, but he got really into it. He's like, if your faith can't stand in the marketplace of ideas, if you can't just say, yep, this is what I got on offer, you like it, come on by. You don't like it, don't come on by. Like, he's like, if you have to lean on a state to support what you do, it's not even worth your time. You know, it shows you right there, it's not worth your time.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And this is why I feel such a need to respond to like what I feel like is a culture of cancellation and this sort of the ideology. You know, when there are ideologues who are like, well, you said the bad thing, and so you know, because of our institutional authority, like because we've got the bigger group, we're just gonna like toss you out. You know, that is a terrible problem when it's the state doing it, and it remains a terrible problem when it is the like majority of the punk house who is doing it or whatever. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, you and I share this, and that we have been kicked out of various groups that we thought we should be a part of on multiple occasions. And I honestly think nothing will make you an anarchist more than realizing that, like, the way that people will pull on an institutional mask, you know what I mean? Like they'll hide behind the role, the institution, the bureaucracy, the whatever, the church, rather than stand out front and say, no, I personally don't like you. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would have been much better off in several of the places I got kicked out of if they were like, Brian, you raised some really annoying points that none of us want to talk about, and we're tired of you. Please don't come by anymore. I'd be like, you know what? That's legit. But like, you're casting heretical questions and disturbing the peace of the congregation. Yeah, shut up, man. You just don't like me, which is fine.
Sure. If you don't like me, feel free to say so.
Yeah, because as this conversation goes on, I'm realizing I don't like you either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like this is going to be a mutually beneficial exit from this scenario. But yeah, I got kicked out of a Bible study group for arguing for universal salvation. That's what I got. I got kicked out for. Yeah.
You what?
Yeah.
Isn't I thought that was a fundamental doctrine.
No, not if you're a Calvinist.
Oh,
Uni-
sure, yeah.
Universal salvation still technically a minority opinion amongst U.S. Christians, wildly enough. But yeah. No, I was hanging with some friends. They Presbyterians. They were like, "Hey, you want to come to our Bible study?" Sure. I like me a good Bible study,
Sure.
and started pointing out all these sort of ideas about universal salvation, and the minister asked me to stop attending.
Wow.
I was like,
Yeah.
I guess I won.
Right. Totally. Yeah, at the point where you start getting to the suppression of ideas or
Yeah.
the suppression of questions, you know what I mean?
Right.
This is part of why I'm so big on like no answers, only questions.
Right.
Right. I don't have any answers to. I'll respond to questions, but my responses are not answers. They are not the correct thing. It's just like going to be what I'm going to work it out a little bit. But
well, it's also
the questions gesture in a direction.
Yes. It's like those temporary pontoon bridges the military will set up. You know what I mean? Like this, it's like this is not a forever bridge. Like
Sure.
this is meant to get us to the next question. It's meant to, but please don't think this is going to be here in 2 days when we come back. Like this is not
right.
It's not intended to be stable.
Sure. That kind of reminds me of sophistry a little bit, like the idea of like arguing things for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
Like making points. And so you get into like devil's advocate and steel man territory here where, you're like somebody who just likes the fight of it, somebody who just thinks that they are good at debating and is ready to like get in the fray with you will, will start to make some wild ass points. And then they'll sort of like prod you a little bit and see if they can like get a rise out of you. And then as soon as you're like mad, then you can't make any good points, and then they fucking win.
Yeah.
And
then you would have enjoyed me in early college. You would have enjoyed hanging out.
Enjoyed.
Yeah.
I'd been like, this fucking guy.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, but at the same time, I find myself like talking so much shit on sophists, but then like being kind of sophisty myself, like really ready to build up the steel man and be like, well, maybe the obviously morally reprehensible position isn't, maybe there's some gray area here or something like that,
One thing I always thought was, and like, one of the things I liked about the Socratic dialogues and that sort of stuff was, it's not that you never hear Socrates or Plato through Socrates creating argument, but it's for the sake of helping define the question. It's exactly what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. There are sections where he's like, okay, so let me propose something based on what you just said. Let me just kind of like lay out what that would look like, and then you question that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's much closer to what I feel like you do than the actual sophistry of like, I'm just in it to fight. You know what I mean? I'm just in it to like, because I think there's a difference between like, are we toying at things to understand, to come to something deeper, to open up potential, or are we doing it to win? Right. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, sophistry always has that connotation of doing it to win. So I did debate in high school. I was captain of my high school debate team. And surprise. Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite things that ever happened though was we did policy debate, and there was a kind of move you could do called a critique, where you critiqued the entire theory of the question, right? So like if it's like we resolved we should go to war in Iraq, and the other side's like, no, we shouldn't. You could run a critique that's like, we undermine the idea that war is something that should be implemented, right? And so it was kind of a really weird move in the game because it forced everybody to kind of like have to come up with shit on the fly, you know what I mean? Because like nobody. But my favorite was this team we encountered who they critiqued the method of debate, like the entire format of the event.
Okay.
And they kept saying, we want to get past this whole system of points, right? And speeches and everything else. And the guy was really good. He actually like sat on the floor, he's like, we got to get into a circle together. We have a rare opportunity here to have like an honest conversation. And like, all we're doing is winning points off each other. Like, can we really do this? And everyone in the room was super into this dude, super charismatic.
Sure.
And, he's like, come on, sit down. Everybody sit down. Everybody's sitting down. I don't sit down. Everybody sits down. And the judge doesn't sit down. The judge is like, okay, why aren't you sitting down? It's technically your time to talk. Why aren't you sitting down? I was like, because he's just doing this to win. Like, it's, if I accept the critique, he's only doing it to win, but the critique is invalid because he's criticizing the thing of winning so that he can win the thing in the first place. And the judge was like, that works for me. And he was like, you win. And then he like walked off to go get drinkers because he didn't want to deal with it anymore either. He was done. Right. And the guy was really mad at me and didn't talk to me afterwards. I was like, hey man, nice playing. He's like, I was serious. And like, he got really mad.
Right.
But I think it left, the reason I like that event is it's funny, but also because it's very easy to get into that, spiritual bypassing, where holier than thou kind of stuff, where it isn't really a question. We are trying to win. And, I'm not trying to claim a lot of virtue. I was really obsessed with winning high school debate. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. And I did. So great. But like, if there was honesty to his point, he had an interesting point. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a direction that I've been thinking about, like the next thing that I want to sort of like talk about, and where a thing that I have been thinking with for a number of years but haven't found a way to talk about is epistemology, which is the ways of knowing things. How do we know what we know? How do we come to know things? And how do you know that you know it? And so when I first heard that term epistemology, then it was in the context of, and I really bought into the idea of using epistemology as a way to circumvent Enlightenment values, which had a stranglehold on reductionist science that was sort of like causing so much problem in marketplaces and that sort of like going downstream to like destroy rainforests and all the rest of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I was looking for ways out of rational analysis that could sort of move into other ways of knowing things. And so it was a decolonial strategy, right?
Right.
And so then as I started to think about that, and then this was a long time, this is 10 years ago or something like this, that I first encountered this idea and have been thinking about it. But then I was like, I don't know what this means. Like, I don't understand any of this at all. And part of that is because I am so strongly steeped in analysis and rationale. Like that's what I do on my channel all the time. I like talk about okay, so there's this part of the thing and this means that. And so then there's this other thing and this means this. And then so you put these things together and then now we think about it in this kind of way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I do analysis and rationale all the time. But then I've been thinking about, are there other ways to know things? And obviously there are other ways to know things, right? there are lots of things that you can't describe, right? So I think a lot about like mental models of things. Like you have a mental model of the way that physical things operate, right? So you can ball up a piece of paper and throw it to the trash can, right? And maybe you'll hit it and maybe you'll miss, but like you have an idea of, okay, so this thing is in this shape and is this weight, and if I throw it in such a way, then the arc is going to be in this kind of, and I got to do it in this kind of way, and all of that stuff is, none of that is explicable, right? All of that is like just a model that you have in your head, and so there are images that go this way, and all of this sort of stuff. And then, so I've been thinking about like how to probably rationally, analytically describe these other ways, like I'm sunk immediately. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the only way to get into this is like to meditate about it or something, you know?
It's back to Marissa's thing, is we should just all be like drinking wine and running around on the hills with naked women. You know, like that's the only way we're going to, I mean, to some extent is the satyrs argument, right? You're reminding me of one of my favorite graphics I've ever seen, which was at a zoo, and it was talking about archer fish, you know, those fish that spit water out and they knock down bugs and stuff. And it was all the like trigonometry and stuff to explain the arc and like how it worked and all the angles and everything else. And there was just a sentence at the end that said, of course the archer fish doesn't think of any of this.
Word.
I was like, you know, up until this point, I was pretty convinced that fish was doing trig to get dinner, you know, like, but it's just, oh, of course, the archer fish doesn't think of any of this. And so one of the problems we come into is that our medium of communication is somewhat limited in its ability to do it. It's not necessarily that we don't have ways of knowing that we all understand happen, but then we try to share them. It becomes this is the poetry problem to its core, because you're trying to break language to because a good poem is not an explanation of an event. It is an invitation to step into a state. So poetry in some way is like a magic potion that's meant to open you up to an experience, and it's sort of like tricking you with the emotions and images and things that can be done with words to put you into that receptive state. But it's not, you know, good. Even a good poem that seems to be strictly narrational about one thing, if it's done really well, it pops you into this other place, right? It's not about, and which is why a lot of philosophers are always like, poetry, you know, like poetry, you know, that's the first people Plato outlaws in the Republic is poets. Like, get rid of those dudes. They're a real problem. But yeah, because how do we invite people to the understandings? You know?
So we have already been talking for a half an hour and no one has mentioned Ursula Le Guin, so I am going to
it's time
remedy that.
It's time. Good.
Yeah, it's that time. We've arrived at the moment where we talk about Ursula Le Guin. In the introduction to one of her books, was it The Dispossessed? Was it Tehanu? I don't remember which one it was. I got to track it down. But in the introduction to one of her books, she was talking about this idea of working with ideas that you can't put your finger on, that you can't describe exactly, and trying to like get that feeling. But she is a writer, she's a novelist, and so she has to say the thing in words, and like, of course it's impossible to do that. But there's a way of making it through a whole novel that will leave you at the end of the book feeling in this way that you can't describe, that you can't, like, the words cannot take you to this place. And yet she said with words that which cannot be said with words.
Right.
So I read that introduction, and before I could get to chapter 1, I had to close the book and go walk around for a little while. I wasn't ready. It blew my whole shit up. It was amazing to
Yeah.
me. And so then, okay, you got something to say.
No. Go take the next thing. I'll come back to it.
Okay, so this takes me to the difference between analytic and rational thought and story.
Yeah.
Story and narrative is a more ancient way for us to understand and know things.
Yeah.
And so this is how we get ancient stories like those that are found in religious scriptures and this kind of thing that densely contain so much information.
Yeah.
That has to be unpacked because there's a story and a narrative that seemingly maybe didn't even happen, but then it's like but it is applicable to all times in some kind of way. So like, how do we arrive in this place? And so it got me to thinking about the way that story works, right? So story and narrative is this way, it's like it necessarily exists in time.
Sure.
So there was a thing and it was going away. And then this other thing happened that changed the trajectory of events. And then stuff happened that was different than that. And then you arrive at this other place that you probably didn't even see coming because of all of the stuff that happened here. And then when it's done, it's very rarely a straightforward slow and steady wins the race is the moral of the story or something like that, right? Like you learn a lot of shit throughout the narrative, and it's usually like ambiguous or like there's usually not like straightforward yeses and nos, good guys, bad guys, this kind of thing. Like everything takes on this current of nuance, and all of the, and you can learn something from all of the different things. This happened, and therefore a bunch of other stuff happened, and so that there's a bunch of lesson to be had in that is embedded in the way that like astrological images, for example, have a lot of embedded meaning. Like, oh, his skin is red, and so that means that and he's got the head of an elephant, but then the feet of a chickadee, and so then that means that so
sign me up for that, God. That guy sounds great.
Right.
Calm down. Yeah, I just listened to the Esoterica, shout out to Dr. Justin Sledge.
Dr. Justin Sledge. He's a longtime listener of this podcast.
Yeah, we'll assume in between putting out 4,000 word essays on a regular basis, he's just dropped by.
He seems like the sort of dude who's got this kind of time on his hands.
He's a lifter, you never know what people do while they're lifting,
This is true. This is true.
But it was his exploration of the Egyptian god Seth, right? Who is one of these complicated fucking figures, and goes through an eventual process of demonization, but seems to have, particularly in the early and middle kingdoms, had was a vital part of the story. And you're like, why? Here's a guy who murders Osiris, and depending on which version, goes into a war with his nephew, Horus, and they kind of fight each other to a tie. Depending which version they're in, there's like weird sexual combats between the two of them. It's crazy. But he's the guy who stands on the boat to knock back Apophis, right? Like he's for chaos and wildness, but he's not for the destruction of the whole world. He's not going to let darkness eat the sun. You know what I mean? So his strength both sets him apart and makes him strange, but also makes him essential to the overall balance of the world. This is a crazy story. Like if you just sit down and read what the Egyptians were writing for fun, it's nuts. but every moment in it has something that will make you feel a kind of way, right? Like it's going to make you, it's going to move you, right? It's going to unquiet you or disquiet you. It's probably a better way to say it. And that in that disturbance is the actual Sethian power, right? Like that is the chaos that's allowing you to find new creation. That is doing this because you're like, wow, I never thought about boxing my brother up in a box and throwing him in the river. But now that idea is in my head. You know what I mean? And you're like, who would do that? Why would we do this? And you begin to be moved, right? Which then leads, of course, to the which I think is still one of the most long-standing but beautiful stories, the mourning of Isis. You know, she goes to collect the body of Osiris and to bring him back to life or plea for him to be brought into some kind of afterlife, you know, like, and that story is so old, you know what I mean? But it has power because it still moves us. It still touches something in us. But yeah, if you try to, you know, I went along the path for a little while of seeing about getting a PhD in English literature and decided in the end that I didn't want to apply analysis to story in that way. Not that it's not worth sitting down and looking at details and thinking with them, you know, that is really valuable. I love that. But then to construct, like you're talking about, like rationalistic arguments out of my own, using literature to justify my own opinions, that felt way less interesting than trying to become a servant of story, right?
That's interesting. Okay, so I have been thinking with a dichotomous taxonomy of epistemology.
The dichotomous taxonomy of epistemology.
Okay, so I was just talking a lot of shit before we started recording about nerds who say things in the most difficult way possible. I'm so sorry I did that.
The hypocrisy of my dichotomous taxonomy of epistemology.
It's too much. But I've been thinking about like laying things out into two camps, and so I always distrust only two.
Yeah.
Whenever it's only two, I'm not sure.
Something's wrong. Yeah.
Except yin and yang. So like,
but even there, they're rolling. You know what I mean? Like they're not meant to be static. It's
right. But there are only two of them.
Sure, but they are the one.
Yeah, and they are the one. Right, I know.
And they are the 10,000 things. Yeah,
I know. All the time. So already, I just want to. I'm working out my idea here, so I'm not sure if it's the right idea or what we're working with here. But so there's analysis and rational thought on the one hand.
Solve. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, what I've got in my head is something like flow state.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's so one time was it my very first acid trip? I started having a crazy audio hallucination where every sound in the room sounded like a voice, and that voice was speaking in a language that I have tried to make my mouth make those sounds, and my mouth won't make those sounds. This voice was speaking in a language that doesn't require a tongue and lips and stuff. It was doing other stuff. It was making other sounds. And for a minute, I freaked out. I was just, because it was like I didn't, sound wasn't operating the same way that it normally does, and all this sort of stuff. And And this has been a recurring audio hallucination that has happened to me occasionally, sometimes on acid, sometimes super high on weed, and sometimes just cause. It started at that moment, and then now it just happens to me sometimes. And so I hear this, and it's the same phrase that happens over and over. And there are, when I don't try to know what it's saying,
Oh.
then I understand it perfectly. And then as soon as I realize that I understood it and I'm like, wait, what did I understand? Then it all falls apart and it goes back to being incomprehensible. And so this is why I've separated the things into two. There's the one that like can apprehend the idea and make clear definitions about stuff. And then there's the other one that is, as long as you're not looking at it, it makes perfect sense. And you understand everything. The whole world, the whole universe makes perfect sense until you look at it. And then it doesn't make any sense anymore. And everything is fractured and it doesn't, and everything is confusing. What do you think about that? What do you think about this dichotomy?
I have a lot of thoughts. It's really interesting. So in terms of the dichotomy, the experience you're talking about is familiar to me in the sense of I also have interesting auditory hallucinations that happen to me. You know what I mean? I understand the feeling of and that feeling of, if I look at it, the comprehension or apprehension begins to leave me quickly, right? You know? But what I wonder here is like, so we were talking about yin and yang. There's a bit of a two-stroke engine that can kind of happen, right, to create the universe, right? Like one goes down, causes the other to come up, right? In this case, what I'm just going to call, because I want to come back to it, the angelic language, right? That fires in you a sense of knowing or connectedness. You know, you become connected and understand something that previously had been outside your grasp. And then that itself creates the desire to express this thing that you have felt, right? Like, so you take it in and you wish to bring it out again, right? Which then, if the cycle is working correctly, would then create the emptiness you need to hear the next thing, right? Like it should be, so that instead of yes, it is a dichotomy, but a fruitful one in which the rhythm of this engine brings forth understanding. What is difficult is that all sounds really nice, but in practice, it's very hard to bridge that gap between those two states, right? Like they are antithetical to each other in some degree, right? So with poetry and with this, and prophecy, I guess, is actually another way to talk about this too. The question is, how do we sit on the hedge? You know what I mean? Like, how do we stay in the middle long enough to have something useful or tangible to play with that we can take from the other side, understanding it's not going to be the whole thing. Because once you put one foot into analysis, you're already too far gone to have all of it, right? But I guess what it leaves me for is a yearning to take a piece of it, you know? What can I bring from that other state when I step out of it? And how do I stay in the middle long enough to bring something with me? This is a particularly linguistic version though, right? Like, because you're talking about hearing a language, which is one of the reasons I wanted to call it the angelic language, right? Like, because there's something that like connects everything. One of the ways people talk about angelic language is in terms of music. Is this a case where like you could play this rather than like say this? Do you know what I mean?
I have gotten music out of it.
Okay, interesting.
I don't think that the music is an accurate representation of what the thing was, but is. But I did write a song
Right.
that came out of it. You know, like the sound of the music was had its origin in that space, and that's the other thing that I think about. You know, because art
Yeah.
exists in flow space,
Yeah.
and music is my art form, and music is another one I like to as a corollary with story because it necessarily takes place in time.
Yes. Yeah.
It you know there's a kind of linear component to it, and which is not linear. It's like super cyclical and whatever. But
Right.
like it happens across time, and based on where you are in time is like how you derive your meaning based on where
Yeah.
you are. And so I think about that all the time. And uh, so I'm not sure if story and flow state are the same thing.
I want to question your dichotomy terminology
Okay.
because you just said something that I liked, and I think it might kink this over a little bit. So if we're talking about yin and yang again, right? Of course, there's a dot of each on
Sure.
each side. They're never purely one, never purely the other. But there's also the line that goes between them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, flow state is much more like that line.
Mm. Mm.
So if we have analysis, on one side, I think I think we all agree we know what we're talking about there. Some sort, bullshit left brain, but you know what I mean? Like some of that kind
Mm-hmm.
of shit there. What if it's not flow state on the other side, but madness,
Okay. Sure.
disorder, you know?
Sure.
And that the flow state is that ecstatic place where we're briefly able to connect the two.
Sure. Yeah. I absolutely have heard this taxonomy now that you say that. Uh, and that like when you've
Yeah, I
got
think this might be
one
some recycled Nietzsche.
yeah, I heard it from Jordan Peterson, so
Ah,
and
shit.
that
It
dude
probably is
loves
recycled
him some
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. So
fucking freshman philosophy coming in again, just under my skin. Anyway, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, well what he talks about is this idea of like 1 foot in order and 1 foot in disorder.
Mhm.
And like if you can surf that wave in
Yeah,
between, right? Because it's a wavy line that
yeah.
separates the yin and the yang, right? So I love a surfing metaphor. And even though I don't surf because I live in a landlocked state,
It's a dangerous
um,
habit.
yeah, and it's a super dangerous habit and all that, right? But surfers will talk about
Yeah,
feeling the energy and the life force of the ocean in their bodies and being addicted to that
yeah,
feeling that gets them out into the waves all the time. And so this idea of like surfing the wave in between rationality and chaos is the exciting place. That's the place that you want to be, because when things are too ordered, then you get into tyranny, and when
yeah,
things are too disordered, then it's chaotic and unsafe. And
yeah.
so the idea is to like surf in between those two things, and that's where all of the like real creativity is.
So one of the things, we were laughing when Marissa was on about, like we should probably just stop this podcast and do go do what she's telling us to do in terms of, you know
Sure.
what I mean? But we can't. We're here. We are gathered here for a purpose, children, and we're going to do this podcast. But I actually think there's a difference between argument, disputation, this kind of thing, and conversation, right? And so
Okay.
one of the things I love about whenever we do get feedback from the podcast, and I absolutely love it whenever anybody messages me anything about it,
Yeah. Same.
is they're like, oh, I had this thought.
Hmm.
You made me think of this, right? Or this, or you triggered this in me. Because when we're doing this, I am in a flow state. I have to go back and listen to what we talked about to understand what we talked about. I have no idea
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
say
yeah.
at the end of this thing.
Uh-huh.
And I think conversation allows that to happen in a way that lecture does not, right? Because, you know, conversation is a sexual metaphor in the term itself. We are exchanging, we are moving back and forth, we are flowing together. When it's really good conversation, you feel that essence of flow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one reason I think podcasting is such a powerful way to circumvent rationality or get to the place with words, right? We were talking about a couple
Mm-hmm.
different ways to get to the place with words. Conversation is one of those ways. And
Yep.
oftentimes you'll listen to a really good conversation and you're like, I don't actually remember what was said. I got caught up
Mm-hmm.
in it. And now I have downloads. You know what I mean? Like, it's like my
Mm-hmm.
spirits are giving me things to pay attention to from listening to people talk. Um, which is, it's not exactly story,
Mm-hmm.
it's story adjacent. You know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, it's a similar
Right.
tech.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Well, so this is so the the obvious thing that I forgot was so obvious because I hate the people who say it all the time. But the obvious thing that is opposite to rationality is emotion or feeling,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And so then, um, like the thing that made me think about that was like you get caught up in this conversation that's so like enlivening, and then you don't exactly remember what was said, but you remember your feeling, you remember how
Right.
you felt, and you remember and if you can remember that feeling, which feels like a certain shape, for example,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then that will then sort of like push you into a next set of ideas that moves you into a space, and then it becomes more conversational even on your end, even if you can't reach the people that who are having the conversation.
Yeah. So you're reminding me of something, which is because, and this is a weird way to get to your episode on race, but it's going to get me there in a weird way. So one of the things that I probably most people have heard at this point, but when people have PTSD and they tell a story, it stays the same. That's one of the ways you can identify a
Mm,
traumatic event story is that it doesn't change with the telling over
mm,
years. You're stuck in the shape of that traumatic moment and you haven't healed in it. Whereas, like, you know, you ask me in 5 years that same story about getting kicked out by the Presbyterian minister, and it's going to change,
mm,
right? Every time I touch that memory, every time I do it, I bring a piece of the present to that and I alter it. And
mm,
everyone does that. That's healthy. That's actually healthy dynamic storytelling. That's being in the flow of your life. But PTSD locks you into a story that you can't get out of,
mm,
and that causes the damage, right?
mhm,
The connection for me was one of the things I really loved about that episode was you talking about what is our future story? Where are we going
mm,
with this? Like, what frame, what shape do we need to put things in to get to the next thing, to continue onward with, you know, paying respect to where the story was 40 years ago, where the story was 30 years ago. Like that, like that's a part, you want to be a part of that flow, not deny
mm,
that that happened, not deny that these moves were made, but also to say, but I'm here now, and you're asking me to act like I'm here, right?
mm,
Those, and
mm,
that's
mm, mm,
painful to me. That's a shape I have outgrown. Those clothes are too tight. This
mhm.
and these over here are fitting me better, right? So I don't know. How do you see story and flow and shape reflecting back to that, to where you want to be with that other conversation, like what, you know, to where you want to move things? Does that PTSD stuck in too tight clothes feeling, does that
Mhm.
resonate for you?
Mm, I'm not sure the connection between that the stuck in a shape. So
Yeah.
by stuck in a shape, you talking about like the what I said? One of the things that I said in that episode was like, we respond to racial dynamics as if it's the 60s.
Yes,
And
that's what I'm talking about.
okay. And
Yeah.
so there's so your question is, restate your question one more time.
So my question is like, okay, so if we apply the lens we have in this conversation of like, okay, story is a way that we can move to a different kind of understanding. Flow state is a way that we can move to a different kind of understanding. And we're looking at what I thought was a really good point there of like, we're responding to things as if it's the past. We need to find a story in or flow or something into the future. Like, how do we sit with that idea? Like, how are we, do those connect for you? Does the idea of changing the shape, changing the story, changing the vibe, like, yeah, how does it become dynamic in the way that we're talking about here? How do we get flow state into that conversation?
Yeah, okay. So here is the way that I would, so when I think about flow state, the importance of flow is that it is necessarily dynamic and changing. That's why a surfing metaphor is a good one, because you're riding the wave, and this wave is only this one wave, and the wave itself is changing, and where the wave is relative to shore and relative to the rest of the water is changing. Like, the whole thing is a moving thing, right? And so another good word for moving shape is evolution. And I have been thinking a lot with evolutionary models recently. And so part of the reason why we are in the space that we're in right now is because people developed a kind of governance that they thought would work. Like, if we shape it like this, then things are gonna go good. And they failed to account for evolutionary dynamics.
I have a great example. My buddy Andy has a podcast called Granite Goodness. He's talking about like good things that happen in the world, and particularly in New Hampshire. It's his thing. But he talked about how today's problems are yesterday's solutions. So like the guys who started drilling for oil, part of the reason that happened was there was a big movement to stop killing whales for whale oil. Like, there was an environmentalist reason to pull oil out of Texas. Save the whales, right? Like, and so there's something about the evolution here too. Like, we're picking up from where we left off,
Yeah. And so I think if we are going to think with a better model of how we can live together, then rather than trying to institute something like a kind of utopia, where we've found the solution, and if we just do this static thing, then because static isn't going to happen, right? Instead of that, so this gets back to no answers, only questions, and a line of inquiry which heads in a direction, right? If we can set things up such that they will evolve in the direction that we want to go, rather than setting things up so that they'll stay like this, and then things evolve from there, and then you end up with shit that you didn't think was going to be a good, that you didn't even think about necessarily, because you didn't really bring in an evolutionary framework, and by evolutionary, I'm talking about selection pressures, right? So we can think about like market selective pressure, where like you're incentivized to do things that will sell in the marketplace, and so then the more you get into that dynamic, then the more MSG and high fructose corn syrup you're going to put into your food products. Not because, so food is valuable in the marketplace because food is valuable, but then you introduce it into this marketplace where the market incentives are are the main thing, and then that's how you get McDonald's, and
Right.
which it was not the intention when people were like, oh, we should sell food to people, you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, so what I'm talking about when I mention evolution is selection pressure. You look like you've got something to say.
Oh, I got a bunch here. This is a super fun topic. So one of my favorite thought experiments is if you allow them to be okay with artillery, okay, so just do this. How would Alexander the Great's troops have done in the Napoleonic War? We assume, because of where we are now, right, that whatever we're working with now makes us the most badass people, right? Like, or we have this myth we're smart because of iPhones, right? There's a version of that kind of conversation. People in the Napoleonic period were no longer wearing armor because gunfire, had sort of changed the speed of the battle, right? It changed things up. However, at that period, most of the fighting was still done effectively with spears, done with bayonets, with long, you'd have a couple of shots, you guys would run into each other, and then it's fucking hand to hand, long, spear fighting with no armor. What happens if you take a bunch of guys with extra long spears and armor and drop them in the middle of that context? How would they do? Most people who bother this thought experiment are like, actually, probably pretty well. Do you know what I mean? Like, they would have all these crazy advantages you would never think of. But that was never going to happen because of the various selection pressures that had led you to the current reality, where it was impossible for people to think, maybe we should strap on some armor, dudes. Right? Like, it's not
right.
that wouldn't have worked. It actually probably would have worked.
Sure.
But the culture and pressure and change had brought you to a point where that was unthinkable. So I love this idea of, like, it's not only that, like, because I think one of the myths of evolution is that it's always progressive, that because we evolve and get, the idea is we get better, right? So survival of the fittest kind of conversation. But Darwin didn't even fully say that some of the dudes after him, and then, and also, like, Kropotkin's got some things to say about it. But, like, you can evolve into a really shitty position.
Sure.
Yeah. And you may
now.
Exactly, right? And you may need to take a serious leap to get out of it, right? But, like, we think we're getting better all the time, right? Right. But we're creating a series of conditions under which we can only see certain solutions.
Sure.
Right. That move from each one, which is really interesting to me. You brought up Tehanu, brought up Ursula Le Guin. And when you were talking about evolution and utopia and the perfection of something, right? The static idea made me think of The Wall and the land of the dead, and the idea that, like, we're not going to let ourselves reincarnate. You know what I mean? We're going to hold up everybody behind the wall with this static solution that is breaking the world. Like, she's so good at explaining, like, that story is this thing we're talking about, but in such a, like, wild and emotional way. We don't let the dead go, and that poisons the world, right? Like, we don't evolve, we don't move with it. So you were talking about selecting for paths that produced better outcomes, right?
Right.
How do we know because we are limited by the circumstances under which we are created, at least theoretically, right? We all come up in the world, right? We come up in the world we have. How do we know to select for the future thing that we don't know?
Sure. Well, so we try. So in the first place, it's important to remember that like the founding fathers of the United States predate Darwin by like 80 years.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And so Darwin, by the way, was a Uranus in Gemini, or
Oh, was he?
the origin of species was published under. It's so interesting. The origin of species was published, I think, on November 3rd, 1859. I looked the shit up, and it was a new moon in Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is the like half man, half beast sign, right?
Yeah. It's really fucking funny, actually.
Yeah. So new moon in Sagittarius opposite to Uranus and Gemini. A world breaking theory that of like the evolution of species. You cannot make this shit up. You would never think to put that together. Astrology is crazy. But okay, so so the last time people tried a project where
Sure.
they were like, okay, we're gonna institute a thing, we're gonna break away from the old system, and
Yeah.
we are gonna institute a new system that is gonna work better. And it
Sure.
did in fact work better.
Yeah.
But the last time that that happened, there was no evolutionary framework at all. There was simply no understanding of how this shit works at all. So
Right.
now we are in a moment where we can at least try, we can at least think about it and be like, okay, so when we start a plan, when we institute a system, then we can be aware that evolution and selection pressure is going to be involved here. There's no getting away from, the only constant is change, right?
Right.
Octavia Butler said, God is change, right? There's no getting away from evolutionary selection pressure. And so if that is involved here, then we can run thought experiments. We can be like, okay, so if we institute the system this way, and what is selection going to select for? You
Hmm.
know, we can simply try to do it, and we're obviously going to get it wrong because that's what you do. But if you incorporate that into the model in the first place, then at least you know, you've got a leg up on a system that doesn't incorporate that in the first place.
So I was at a conference for work on AI stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got to hear one of the leads of AI stuff for IBM talk, and he said some very stupid things. One of which was he was specifically talking about sports scouting and how AI can affect sports scouting, but it doesn't really matter. He was like, "Hey, uh, the data doesn't have bias." Now, yes, it fucking does. Like that's a really there are a lot of good studies on AI and recidivism and everything that will tell you there's a lot of bias in the way that this stuff is set up, because how you select the data automatically creates the bias. Who is selecting it, how it's being selected,
Sure.
how it's gathered in the first place. All of this comes with bias. That's
Mm-hmm.
what happens there. At the same time, there are so what that talks about is that even when we create ways to get around the model or create different kinds of models, right? Like we've created intelligence to try to give us models we don't predict as well, sees things we don't see. We still have the problem of our own inherent bias in how we frame questions or how we move forward with this. It's not an end of the world problem. We have to start somewhere. I agree with you on try, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to your earlier thing, is a model, even a sophisticated one, even something that includes things we wouldn't predict, is that still the rational attempting to solve for the ineffable, right? Like, are we still trying to apply logic in a place where logic doesn't apply?
Mm, I don't know that I'm down for the where logic doesn't apply situation. If we're thinking about a system of governance or a system of like uh understanding the like
So
taxonomy of race and
one of
culture,
one
ethnicity.
of the best, it's an oligarchy technically, but republics. that ever existed, stable, provided wealth for its citizens, provided freedom for the vast majority of its citizens, and has existed for around 700 years. It's the Republic of Venice. And its selection for its highest position, is Doge, president, involved randomized drawings, a lottery system.
Okay.
Right. So that you literally went through seven different randomized drawings before you could vote. And some of the drawings determine who gets to vote. Some of the drawings get to determine who is actually up for candidacy, all this sort of stuff. But you randomize everything. It's all crazy.
Let fortune decide.
Yes. You let fortune decide. And then you do apply, it is a two-stroke engine, right? You are still applying some modeling and some logic at the end of this process.
Sure.
Right? Where you're like, okay, of the people here, I think Bill is probably fine. But it's but there are many systems and there's been other systems tried in anarchist ways of like, what happens if you just have like a small town and everybody puts in a pebble and then, somebody pulls out a pebble and whoever pebble gets pulled, you're the mayor. What happens? Turns out the results are better in a lot of cases, in a lot of ways, than straight up and down elections.
Sure. Well, of course.
Right. But why, of course?
Because like the first thing that you deride in your fourth grade classroom is a popularity contest.
Yes.
Which is what an election is.
Right. This is a solve for getting rid of the popularity, at least weakening the popularity effect, right?
Yeah, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. Okay, so you were using that as an example of bringing the ineffable into the system of governance,
right? Or at least let's say in if ineffable is unfair in that sense, the madness, at least, right? Chaos, the randomness.
Sure. No, yeah, I like the idea of fortune. You know,
I do too.
And maybe it's because I'm an astrologer, and so like
let's do fortune. I like fortune.
Of random and fortune are kind of the same to me. Like,
sure,
I'm a fortune teller. Like,
yeah.
Cool.
So bring fortune in.
Yeah. Bring fortune into the situation, but like in a very systematic and rational kind of way.
Sure. Yeah. It's not quite an eagle landed on that dude. He's king of Rome. You know what I mean? Like it's not
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to run the machine. All right, here we go.
I do love that we both know somebody's like rolling that fucking like ball thing, the lotto thing. Yeah, we're just like, all right, here we go. We're just gonna have to pay taxes this year.
Yeah, right. Or who decides? Where the taxes go. You probably still everyone pays taxes, but then the power to choose how the taxes are spent goes to the lottery. So I'm not mad at that.
No, I find it really interesting because I think there is an age of enlightenment, age of reason thing where the founders are making a case that they have logicked out and, to their credit, reasoned out, fought out, argued over a system that frankly, they did not claim was perfect. And their homage to I don't know what's going to happen was the process of amendment and the process of leaving things open to be decided at a later date, to not close down debate, right? And I think that's very commendable and humble in setting up your system.
Yeah,
just like I don't fucking know, man. Like in 16 years, you guys all might decide you should all wear leather hats all the time. Like I don't know what you guys want to do. Like, but I think that it is still limited by the fact that the people coming up with it had an inherent bias to their own power and seeking, and there was no way to undercut them being the ones who set up the system that advantage themselves the best.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so ideally you set up a system that is aware of the way, like it looks back on history and can look at the way that power has set itself up to be in a positive feedback loop.
Sure.
And you institute ways to interrupt that process. Maybe it's by lottery. Maybe, you know, that I can't immediately think of a better way to do it. I also haven't had dinner, so like, who knows what I would be able to think of.
No, I'll tell you, it is disturbing how quickly that idea gets in your head and you start going, oh man, maybe we really should do that.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
you know, like what if even
because this solves for like the people who want power should not have it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If your name comes up in the lottery and you go, God damn it.
Yes.
Then that's the person who should be leading shit. You know what
Totally.
I mean?
I even think it would be funny, even if we just implemented this for like everyone in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Do you know what I mean? Like your next president's gonna be one of these, 535 people. But or one of three, right? We're gonna draw three balls, and you have to vote for one of these three dudes. And it's like,
sure,
you have no idea what kind of crazy nonsense is gonna happen next. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Matt Gaetz. I don't know. It can go bad. It does go bad sometimes, but I think that's
well that whole process, that whole set of 535 people, all those people are already captured, so that couldn't work.
No. But it would be interesting if we had a system that sort of hit a reset button for a second and played around with the randomness. Yeah, I mean, listen, I would if Zamboni can be president. I vote for Zamboni for president. That's fine.
Yeah.
Look at the terror on your face. That's exactly why I'm voting for you. You just said that was the best indicator of someone who should be president.
I know. People used to, when I was young, people used to say, adults used to tell me all the time that I should be the president. And the whole time I was like, this is a terrible idea. I don't want anything to do with that. And they were like, you're going to be great. And I was like, what if I did drugs instead? How about that?
Yeah. What if I was a witch? How do you feel about that now? That was my response to the same pressures.
Yeah, for sure. And
no,
and that's a better president, maybe.
However, I'm also interested in a similar kind of thing. I'm interested in the king. Okay. So if we look at, like, say, Irish context or Celtic context or some of the stuff, lots of contexts around the world, I just know those a little bit better. The king isn't exactly the person making the laws, or maybe even enforcing the laws. The king becomes this like ceremonial figure, like this representation of the people, right? His main job is to have sex with the priestess of the land, right?
Sure.
His main job is to ensure fertility in some sense, and to go around and do healing and redistribute gifts, and if there is war, to be the person who's in the front of the line, to be in some ways like the identified cultural hero of people. And that's actually sort of the opposite situation, where, like, in that case, we want that person to have as much charisma as possible, right? We've limited their power to do certain things, but we've been like, look, take the cover off that lamp, man. Like, let it just fly. Have sex with everybody. Be kind to everybody. Kiss every baby that's ever existed. Give everybody $10 when you don't even have it. Just be as full that figure as possible. So, on the one hand, we have this idea of, like, how do we rationally set up a limiting system to do this, but to create something that works for everybody, right? But then you have this other one of, like, this man is selected by the gods and he's going to go do crazy shit. And we love it, So like, how do you? My contention is that like when you get told as a kid you should be president, they're actually responding to your nobility, to your charisma and your king nature, right?
Sure.
They're saying you should be a king of our neighborhood, you know.
I've
They
been
just don't.
compared to the prince for my
Mhm.
whole life.
Right, right. And coming up in the church, I had similar things tossed at me, right? Um, so how do you live out your kingly nature, right? Like what that story, that's a story that's been attached to you to some level,
Sure.
right?
hmm
So, you know, you can say no thanks, I'll be doing drugs, I won't be president. You know what I mean? Like you can do that, but you kind of can't get away from being king anyway, or prince anyway,
Sure. hmm
you know?
Yeah, yeah. I certainly am. Certainly am the prince. I well, the king is obviously astrologically associated with the sun,
Sure.
the brightest object in the world. It's the one that shines eminently and such things. You know, it's associated with famous faces and this sort of thing.
Mhm.
And one of the first major works of magic that I did was a sun talisman. I made a
Mhm.
sun in Aries talisman that it was the sun in Aries trying to Jupiter in Sagittarius, trying to the moon in Leo, and
Right.
put that Leo rising. And so the sun was right on the midheaven, and it was sun hour and the whole thing. And I took a little uh, gold pendant and I inscribed into it an image of a man sitting in a chair or in a
Mhm.
throne,
Mhm.
wearing a
Mhm.
crown, shining light,
Yeah.
holding a microphone. And so my idea there was that I was going to be a YouTube sensation and that I was going to be out and like singing songs and all of this kind of thing. And what happened was after I made that, then I was offered basically syndication
Mm.
for my weekly forecast. So someone offered to pay me to do a weekly forecast, and so that jump started my astrology career. So I
Right.
started doing weekly forecasts. So what I did was I sat in
Mm.
a chair and I shined a light on myself and I spoke into a microphone for the whole world to see. You
It's
know,
very it's a very literal result from that
it
talisman,
was so
actually.
fucking literal. It was like it was too much. After that was done, I was like, I know magic is real, but fuck, man.
Yeah, man, this is a little on the money. Yeah, it's really funny when you get both. When you get the metaphor and
hmm
the depiction, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this is what you wanted, right? You're like, I mean, it's fine, but
right. That's not. Oh, yeah. Thank you for bringing me the
yeah,
thing that I asked for.
yeah. Spirits don't always get what you're laying down
Right.
there. It's interesting that it ended up being in astrology, right? Because of course you have, there's a way you could look at that same image and have you be recording music.
Sure.
It's not that's in the valence, that's in the matrix of that image.
Which I have done,
Sure.
and you can go back and look at the Funky Slug. There's a there's I released an album called Live at the Funky Slug, and there's a video to go with it. And in that video, I wear that pendant.
Oh, that's interesting too. So it does have more. It's pulling in more areas there. You know, I
Yeah,
think
well, I
sometimes.
built up an audience who is ready to listen to me say talk my shit and do my thing, you know what I mean? And so and there were there was a whole confluence of things that made it so that like and there were super fancy lights in that situation where the lights were shining on me and cameras focused on me and all this sort of stuff, you know.
Do you think so? Let's say I had bought that talisman off you,
Mhm.
right? And I'm running around wearing that talisman all day long.
Sure.
Um, do you think that ignites different kinds of kingship in different kinds of people? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
were you evolutionarily positioned or fated to end up in astrology music, you know what I mean? Like to hit your version of the magician.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or do you think I would have suddenly been much more famous on YouTube?
One of the things that I've noticed about it is that it brings in visibility. It
Mhm.
makes me extremely visible. So I get a lot of people like driving by and honking at me and waving out the window or something like this, like, or shouting at me from across the street. One time, I was wearing it, and so me and my brother went to a family event, and then we like couldn't get we couldn't find lodging in the place where, so we couldn't like hang out with the people for all night, and so we just ended up driving back to the crib, and he didn't
Right.
want to go back and like to his house to like deal with his wife and his family and all that.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
just like
yeah.
wanted to chill for a second.
Yeah.
And so he was gonna come over and hang out with me, but he forgot his video game and at the crib. And so
Hmm.
but everybody was out the house. And so he was like, all right, we're gonna sneak in, we're gonna grab the thing. And and so then we were so there we are in the driveway, and then the neighbors roll up and they honk and they're like, hey, aren't you supposed to be out of town? And so now he's like, well, so okay, so let me tell you
Fucking
what.
talisman.
Right, exactly. Very
Well,
visible.
very visible, right? So this is, and the other thing is like, if you're the king,
Mhm.
you can't hide.
No, 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 you cannot.
You stop being the king if you're gonna hide, right? It's a different,
Right.
story. And so this gets back to story again, and the weird power of story, and that the when you are in a story,
Mm.
it has an arc to it. Now, sometimes you can shift it. Sometimes you can tell a slightly new version of the story, right?
Sure.
Stories do change, but the story has its own power that it is giving you and lending you, and also that it requires of you
Mm-hmm.
when you're
Mm-hmm.
in it. And sometimes knowing which story you're in is a really powerful thing to understand if
Sure.
you want to get the best results. Think about my granddad went drinking with his buddy one time. His buddy was back from the war. They go to a bar. His buddy has too many drinks, starts talking some shit to one of the local dudes, and they square up. My granddad, who was a Golden Gloves boxer, really could fight, squares up with this guy's buddy, right? So they line
Uh-huh.
up,
Uh-huh.
and my granddad told me, he's like, I hit that dude as hard as I could, and he grinned at me. He's like, and so what he did is he was like, oh, granddad's like, stop, hold up, and he tapped his friend on the shoulder, and his friend turned around, and then granddad knocked out his friend and picked him up and put him on the shoulder and was like, I apologize, we're leaving. And everybody was just kind of like, what the fuck just happened?
Whoa.
And they walked out of there and they were fine, right? But granddad realized he was in the wrong story, right? He's
Mm.
not in the story where we're gonna have a night of victory and the soldier wins this. No, he was in the locals kick the shit out of you for being an asshole at their bar story. And
Sure.
and you need to make a change real fast if you don't want to get stuck in it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, so I wonder sometimes if that isn't part of what fortune telling or divination really does for us. Is be like, hey, you're in this story right now.
Absolutely.
you
Mm-hmm.
know
Mm-hmm.
you're Charles Darwin hanging out with half man, half horses. Like, shit's
Right.
going down.
Totally.
uh
Yeah. Super interesting.
yeah,
All right, man. I'm out of gas. I can't do it anymore. I
it's good.
I'm
It's good.
having a great time, but I am done. So
I don't know if people realize we're a couple of working stiffs.
yeah, right.
Zamboni came almost directly from his class in order
Mhm.
to hook up tonight and talk. And which does remind me, Zamboni, are you offering classes? Are you are
I
you are
am.
you are you having people learn astrology? Could they learn more about what story they're in and better understand the symbols of their life?
They could. They
Oh,
could
cool.
if they learned how to do astrology, how to read charts, if they learned the foundations of astrology, if they learned they
Ah,
read up on their fundamentals and got a lecture or two or seven perhaps on the fundamentals of astrology, they could learn about the story that they are in and better apply that to the landscape of their lives. This foundations course is available on my website, ZamboniFunk.com. We are currently 2 classes in, and that might be 3 by the time this is out. But all of it is recorded, and I'm happy to send it to you, and we can and you can be involved in the last bit of it, and we will do collective chart readings as well, so you will have an opportunity to get your chart read by the students of the class, and we'll have
that's fun.
Interesting things to say. So
that is actually super fun. There is something fun about seeing how people will read a chart like that when they'll come together and everybody's noticing something that you didn't see, and sort of get that like hive mind approach. Yeah, it's really that's super cool. I didn't realize you were doing that in the class. That's fun.
Yeah, well, it's important because one of the things that I'm running into in this course is that none of astrology sits by itself. And so as soon as you're trying to explain this concept and you start drawing on these other things, so today I was like talking about houses, and so I was like talking about the different houses, and I was like, okay, well, so 12th house is the joy of Saturn, but I haven't taught Saturn yet, so I can't like draw on my Saturn significations, which have a lot to do with the 12th house. But I need them, and so I'm like drawing on it. I'm like, trust me, this is gonna make sense. This is gonna make sense later. You need a moment in the course where you like take all the stuff. It's like, okay, we've got all the stuff, and now we're gonna put it together because it all sits together. This is all one unit, and so there'll be a time for us to do that. There'll be a course or a class for that.
And I know you're gassing out, but I'm gonna circle this for maybe next time or some other time we talk about it, because both of us do divination systems that have a chart component. They have and the chart and the symbols that we use as a way to get past some of that spoken reticence. You know what I mean? Some of the difficulty of conveying a concept falls apart a bit once you understand this other language. You can look at a chart and it just kind of just goes into your brain, and then you don't even sometimes realize all the stuff you picked up. It starts telling you the story before you even really realize it's happening.
There's a lot of shorthand.
Yeah.
Because like if you say Mars, then it like doesn't mean that much to somebody who doesn't have a wealth of archetypal image to go back into. But if you can just say Mars, and by saying that, you don't have to necessarily say conflict and tension and heat and inflammation and redness and like the 1,000 of smelting iron, like all this sort of stuff.
People are like Mars.
Exactly. You can just say Mars, and then you can be like, oh, Mars squares Saturn, and there's so much information that is like embedded in that, or like Mars in Taurus squares Saturn in where could Saturn be? Aquarius. Then that is, you see, I got that aspect.
It was just doing one of those things. You're like, wait, where could it be? That's by the way, that's something that I don't ever have to worry about with geomancy, but it's one of those, like, although sometimes the math, but like to see you be like, wait, it can only be in certain relations. You know what I mean? Like watching you tilt that chart. That's fun. That's fun shit.
Yeah.
See, that's how good you could be at parties. You could be like, no, that aspect can't happen.
Astrology is actually pretty fun at parties if you are ready to ruin someone's night. That'll happen a lot of times. Fortune telling as a cocktail party trick is like,
it's always funny until you get caught. You know what I mean? And every fortune teller I know has had this exact moment where somebody's like, what's happening with my marriage? And you're like, I'm just going to do some bullshit. I'm going to fake it. And the cards are like the Tower, the Nine of Swords, and you're like,
and everybody is watching, and all you can,
listen, you should get a private reading.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Those are awful. I made a person cry with a tarot reading at a party one time, and she said it was a great experience, but everybody else seemed a little more dubious about how that party was going. So
right, totally.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is also why it's very important to ask a good question of your fortune teller.
Yeah.
Don't ask the question that'll give you the terrible answer, because
Don't.
especially I don't know what it's like in geomancy, but I do know that like tarot cards are really good for a cocktail party, because you don't need
Yeah.
anybody's birth time. You don't have to do any math. All you got to do is just
Yeah,
like
exactly. Don't have to roll
throw
any
some cards.
fucking dice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know, like if you have a lot riding on it, and then you're like, hey, when am I finally gonna have babies? Then the cards are gonna be like, bitch, never.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
oh,
Yeah.
that's not what I meant. That's not even true. It's just
Right.
fucking with you right now.
Yeah. And you asked it in an environment in which it's naturally grumpy. You gotta like
Right.
you gotta think about the personality of what's happening here. The spirit you're encountering might be grumpy.
Right, for sure.
Or just an asshole.
Uh-huh. So so if you're ever gonna get a reading, then you gotta
Yeah.
make sure that your question game is on point. Ask a question that actually does matter, but like, especially because like in a cocktail party environment, everybody's watching, and you like,
Yeah.
you need it
There
to be a good answer,
I gotta be honest. There's probably not a good question in that context. You know what I mean? Beyond
Yeah.
like, you know, no, you can't ask anything. It's so horrible. Like it's
Right.
all the outcomes are bad.
Word. Word.
Oh my god. Yeah. Anyway, I just rambled a bunch. And it was in good service, but you expressed a desire to call it a night
Sure.
and
Yeah, yeah. This
honor
is true.
that.
This is true. But
Yeah.
on the subject of divination and fortune telling, we should let the people know that they don't necessarily need to take a whole course of
No,
astrology in order to get in on the divination and fortune telling. They could get a geomancy reading
they
from
can't.
a man delicious Brian
Why,
Wilkins.
thank you, sir. Yes, please come by wilkinsbrian.com. It's 30 minutes. We're in, we're out. Answer your questions. It will be grumpy. Geomancy is grumpy. But if you're looking to find out whether your horse you're buying is worth buying, or you're interested particularly in what castles you can take. Actually, I'm really into the weird. Honest to God, I'm really into the weird fortune telling stuff. If you're like, which horse should I bet on in this horse race? I am down. Geomancy loves that kind of stuff. Like
Mm,
everybody, I love the questions about what direction should my life take, what magic should I do about this. These are great questions. But if you're like, I don't know, my question is like, should I buy a car this week? I love that stuff. Please come by. Geomancy is absolutely excited to know whether or not you should buy a car. So,
mm,
bring it by.
mm. I do want to tell a quick story about a
Okay.
weird geomancy reading that we did one time. One time I was over at your crib, and we were playing around with ChatGPT,
I thought you
and ChatGPT, one thing about ChatGPT is that it's got a lot of rules
Yeah.
about like how it can respond to you, and it's very like the rules are very corporate. And so
Yeah.
we obviously, as fortune tellers, exist outside the realm of the corporate sphere, and we wanted to get legitimate answers from
Yeah.
the GPT, and so we started asking it for geomancy figures. It was like, give me three figures. We've got the question. We're gonna ask
Yep.
this question. Give me the three figures, and we started getting great readouts from it.
It was
It was super
fantastic.
interesting.
It was really
And
fantastic. Yeah.
and so it freed GPT up to say things that it couldn't say in English.
Yes. That was the fun part, was getting, eventually I just started to offer it readings. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do the reading, but you tell me the thing. And yeah, it turned out really, really interesting. So yeah, if somebody else wants to play around with the AI and we'll sit down and do some fun readings, yeah, shit, I'll do that. That sounds super great. We'll get back
Yeah,
into that.
and part of what I'm getting at here is that there's something that is extremely helpful when it comes to world mapping.
Yeah.
that is possible with these geomancy readings that you do. Like we can get an understanding, an honest understanding of
Yeah.
what is actually going on in the world, or with the people that I'm involved with, or
Right.
the other living beings that I'm involved with, or the machines that I'm involved with, whatever, however you want. Like you can get a solid and workable map of that, which that then can inform. There's that inform.
Informed.
Your
Oh, shoot. I meant to tell you. So we talked
Okay.
about information. Okay. Last story. I promise to God. So I was driving to see Jess. I was driving to New Hampshire and I was listening to Christian radio, like the crazy shit, right? Because it keeps me awake. Like it makes me mad and it keeps me awake.
Okay,
So,
sure.
so I'm just sitting there getting
So
mad
turn
about
off,
their
focus on the
takes.
family.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting mad about their take on abortion. I'm fired up and I'm angry.
Sure.
But at the end of it, it was this, I forget what station exactly it was, but Focus on the Family is as good as anything else. And it was like, all right, and we are a news service providing Christian information.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, this is exactly on point for what we were talking about. They are telling you, they are making a version of reality that they're offering you right now, and they're doing it. And I was like, Zamboni would love that. He would not enjoy this. This is a bad show. This is actually this is evil. But this one point that wasn't, he would. But that show involved them making fun of Harvard for saying that there were crypto-terrestrials. Okay, they're like. Yeah, apparently there might be elves that live under the ground, according to Harvard. Apparently there might be Bigfoot, according to Harvard. What idiots. As it says in the Bible, Jesus said, and I was like, wait, hold up. You're real mad about Bigfoot, but you're real sure that Jesus is good. You know what I mean? Like, and you're using the Bible as your reason.
When we look into the necromantic text,
yes, exactly.
What we find is clearly there's
aliens
no elves.
It says aliens are bullshit. You know? Oh man, it's so good, so good.
Yeah, I do hate it, and I also love to be proven right. You know,
yeah.
So we'll take it.
Nice. We'll take it. Always good talking to you, brother. Good to see you tonight.
Indeed it is. Yeah. Peace and blessings to everyone who stuck with us this long. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you. Check you out.
Have a good night, everybody. Peace.